Sometimes you have more than just one data set that you want to load into R. Maybe it's 10, maybe it's hundreds, maybe it's even thousands. And to load many data sets into R, you need a good technique. And in this tutorial, I want to go through an example with you together to show how you can read in many files into R. Well, let's load the tidyverse package first, and then let's create a bunch of data sets. So let me just quickly copy some code here I've written down already. And this code essentially creates many files, nothing else, and also nothing more. So let's quickly see that it's working. So we have the FS package, which allows us to create directories and so forth. Then we create different samples of one data set, and we're going to write them to disk. So let's go through these lines together. So first load the package, then I want to create a folder named data many files, and if I look into my files here, I can see that I've got this data folder, and now I can just create a new folder here. It's called many files. Then I create 20 different, or is it 25, 20 different samples of the MPG data set. So it's 25 times. I just shuffle it around and write it on a list, and then I write these data sets to my newly created folder. So if I jump into the folder now, I should see all these CSV files. Now that I have these files in my folder, I can solve the actual problem. So how do I read in many files into R? Well, 2 steps. First, you need to create a vector of the file paths, and once you have this vector, you can read them into R with your read CSV file, or also with another function which is called mapdfr. But let's first create this vector of CSV files. So I call this vector CSV files list files, and we have 2 options for this. Let's start with the base R option. So we have the list files function, and this has a path argument. So I specify the path, which in my case is many files, and then I need to provide a pattern. Well, the pattern in this case is just the file ending, which is CSV, and then we also want to return the full names of these file paths. Let me run that code. Maybe let's make this window a little bit smaller and have a look at these file paths. Now I can see that I've got all these different file paths in one vector. If I would have said false here, then the following would have happened. I would not get the full path, but just the relative path to these files, but I actually need the full path, otherwise this trick is not going to work. Okay, so now we have a handle on the file paths. Next, let's load them into R, or maybe next, let's find out another way we can create these file paths with the FS package. So let's just use the FS package here, library FS, and then this library package has the dir.ls function, which is kind of similar. Again, you provide the path, many files in this case, and then you have something called a glob, and here you specify a regular expression of how the files should look like. And in our case, this is any character, anything before that, and then we have the CSV file as the ending, and we're only looking for files, because we could also look for folders or something else. And if I look at this vector, I should see the same results. Now that we have this vector of file paths, we can load the data sets into R. And again, there are 2 ways to do this. The first thing we can do is to use the mapdfr function from the per package. Well, you basically just paste in your vector of files, and then you read this. Well, you can just maybe return the dot here, and if I just return the dot, it just returns the file names. Maybe let's go for map, then you can see it just returns all the file names. But since we want to return the data frames, we need to read these file names with the read CSV function. So like this, and now you can see that I have a data set of 500 rows and 11 columns, and actually it just read the data set into R, and I can also store that and call it MPGs for now. Now if I have a look at it, I should see the dataset here. If you find these warnings or messages annoying here, you can also remove them. Just type in show call types equals false, and then you should not see these messages anymore. And you should just see the dataset. And an even easier version of this is to just copy this code, and then you can just paste in the file paths into readcsv, because this argument here is actually also vectorized. So we can just redo the same with less code, and there you go. You have all these different CSV files in one data frame, which is kind of cool. Well, one last thing, it could be that your data sets are not in just one folder, but many folders. Not uncommon. So how do we deal with this problem? So let's maybe first let's make this an actual problem. So let's say multiple directories. So if multiple directories, let's create them first. Let me again copy some code. There we go. So let's do some corrections here, and then I go through the code with you together. Okay, so first thing I did, I created 40 different samples of the MPG dataset. It's not so important here how I did this. Just remember that this is a list of data frames. And then I created new directories with the fs package. So if I jump back to the data folder, I should see the nested folders folder, and within that I have 2 more folders. And then I write 20 of those data sets to the first folder and the other 20 to the second folder. If I jump into these folders, I should now see my data. Well, next I can use the same thing we did in the beginning and just read in my and get a handle on my file paths. So we would, let's call this CSV files nested. List nested folders, and of course this is in the data folder. The glob is .csv and the type is file. Now run this code and it's not really successful. As you can see, it returned nothing, not a single file. That's because I didn't use the recurse argument here, because we're not looking recursively into the folders, just the parent folder. If we set recurse to true, it looks into every folder, so it basically crawls through all these folders and then finds all the CSV files we have here, and the rest is quite simple. So we just copy the code here from the beginning and read in all these CSV files into this new data frame, which we called MPG new. And now let me run that code, and you should see that all my data sets are in one data frame. And this is how you read many files into R, and I hope this trick was worth your time. See you next time.